Hey guys, I hope the holidays treated you well. If not, well, it's 2025 now, so I guess that there's more life to live. But it was a pretty active Christmas at the cinema. It was a real sex freak Christmas, plus a complete unknown. And honestly, it felt pretty good. A lot of people went to the movie theater to go see some mid-budget films that, to me at least, all had a pretty good level of merit. So first, let's start off with the films that you did not go see with your dad, or if you did, that's kind of cool. Babygirl's the newest film from Helena Rain, the director of Bodies, 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 which I greatly enjoyed, and this one follows maestro of cinema Nicole Kidman as a CEO of a prominent AI company who has an affair with an intern with an emphasis on domination. This is very much a 2020s erotic thriller. It has some trademarks of the genre, but it does feel very fresh considering we haven't really seen a whole lot from this genre, and in a way that is, this in your face. Because this is not the most subtle movie ever. It's playing on power dynamics across all, aspects of life. It's critiquing corporate culture. It's talking about how sexuality is viewed, especially concerning those in leadership positions. This movie has a lot on its mind, even though, it does kind of play out like a pretty standard yet quite gripping erotic thriller. You uncomfortably smirk when the characters are doing things that, they should not be doing, and you kind of feel oddly conflicted when their actions catch up with them. This is to say that the mechanisms at work here are working. Nicole Kidman does a lot in this film, and I'm glad that she feels comfortable doing it. I think a lot of people will reduce her performance down to how physically compromised she is, but I do believe that it goes beyond that. She understands every aspect of this character, and Harris Dickinson is really able to, I guess in this context, match her freak. As this intern that she has an affair with, he's able to be really funny yet oddly quite sad and unpredictable. There's this bluntness to his character that is quite compelling. He, just like many aspects of this film, just makes you squint. Did he really say that? And yeah, he did. And even outside of the main two, Antonio Banderas plays the husband of Kidman, and this is his best work since Pain and Glory. He's incredibly likable, and even though he's not in the movie a great amount, as this loving and thoughtful husband, he's always in the back of your mind while you're watching some of the more difficult to watch segments. And that's what I really liked about Babygirl. There's a clear heart here that is not difficult to tap into. This could have been some radical sexual liberation film that completely casts aside traditional ideas of relationships and love, but it doesn't. I mean, obviously the movie is interested in shock, so there is a healthy dose of sexual liberation, but even though Babygirl depicts a lot of debauchery, it does it in a very human way that doesn't discount the personal stakes of a relationship like this. In fact, the stakes are sadly what drive the relationship, which isn't great for the relationship, but it is pretty good for the drama. And this messed up game between the two really opens up the door to, oddly, the importance of family. That's right, this is a movie about family. The most meaningful relationship in this film is actually between Nicole Kidman and her daughter, played by Esther McGregor. They have some real conversations that I thought did develop a kind of messily comprehensive mother-daughter relationship that, as far as movies go, we're not all that accustomed to seeing. I think from afar, it could be easy to cast off Babygirl as kind of lazy entertainment that speaks to the gutters of the brain, but it doesn't. It uses its scandalous qualities to ask the questions of how sexual frustration plays into people's behaviors, how sexuality is molded by our experiences, and how control is an incredibly pervasive element of our lives. This isn't a perfect movie. I mean, I don't really think that it goes above and beyond, but it certainly communicates its ideas in a fresh and compelling way. I can't really have a super personal relationship with this film because luckily I can't really relate all too much. But even with the fact that I didn't find it too relatable, I was certainly taken with the film, and I was very interested to see where it's going, mostly due to some great performances and writing. Babygirl is getting a 7.4 out of 10. All right, well, now on to a movie that also made me uncomfortable, but I didn't smile as much with this one. Nosferatu is Robert Eggers' newest dip into gothic horror as a remake of the 1922 classic, and is a relatively similar story of Count Orlok venturing to retake his love while also bringing plague and death to a bunch of very sad people. So Robert Eggers has been talking about doing this movie for a long time. He's clearly quite interested in this story. And so I was very interested to see what he would do with this movie. Would he find a new thematic some kind of new spin to make this story fresh? And I guess that there are some spins here. Maybe some ideas are more accented than they were in the original, but I gotta say, overall, I was a little bit disappointed. That being said, of course, the craftsmanship is top notch. Eggers and his cinematographer, Yaron Blaschke, continue to put incredibly interesting images in front of us. They're making movies that don't look like any other movies being made today. And, while I have, quite a few problems with this film, I think that deserves credit. And I think the performances here are also incredibly strong. Lily Rose Depp as the main subject of torment for Count Orlok is doing some wild shit. To say it was a brave performance would be an understatement. Nicholas Hoult as well continues to be ever stressed out on screen, and I think he's just tremendous at it. Whenever movies bully Nicholas Hoult, I'm just having a great time. Aaron Taylor Johnson also maybe gives the best performance I've seen from him. I mean, obviously, it's a step up from Craven, right? And whenever the movie starts, he was kind of an odd character. He was like this very typical like man character who's strong and, prideful, I guess. But I think that whenever the layers are kind of like revealed with this character and he kind of goes a little crazy, I think he might be the best part of it for me. He's trying to keep everything together even though it's pretty obvious that he can't. Willem Dafoe and Ralph Ineson also play interesting medical buddy cops who add quite a bit of comedy. I kind of wish they were in the movie more. And that's the thing. Just from the images and the performance alone, like, there's more than enough reason to watch Nosferatu. And it's interesting to me that I didn't love this movie because it does employ types of storytelling that I usually do appreciate. This film has no problem sitting in a moment and really taking in the environments and period elements. The problem is that I think the clear attention to visual detail wasn't really matched by the script. To me, this is a very repetitive movie that requires a lot of investment from the audience and into its characters, right? But I didn't think that there was a whole lot to invest into. Now, obviously, these characters are drawn off of classic archetypes, and so there's a throwback quality to the lack of depth of these characters, but really all we see from these characters is fear and insanity. And that is clearly a choice. Robert Eggers designed Nosferatu to mainly work on an affectual level of dread and horror. And it's clear that many audiences are really buying into this, but to me, I just wasn't really able to because I sadly didn't really care. There's a scene in the third act that is really meant to be like this, oh my gosh, what the hell moment, but because I kind of had checked out a little bit, it just didn't really work. I sadly left a little bit unaffected when I think that that's probably the worst thing you want to say whenever you leave this movie. And the kind of one-note feeling of this world is pretty much backed up by the lack of locations. The Northman, probably my favorite of Eggers' films, works best for me, I think, because there is like this more adventurous quality to it. You're always forced into new places and new worlds. Nosferatu seems to want a similar level of scope. I mean, maybe the most iconic image from the film is the shot of Count Orlok's shadow hand moving across the city. And that does work really well because you feel the grandness of his power and evil, but most of the time, scenes are just set in bedrooms and houses. Now, there is a thematic reason for this, but I do believe that the lack of varied places kind of resulted in the movie feeling smaller than it should have. And to talk about the themes of this movie, which I'm not entirely sure Robert Eggers is too invested in himself, but there are a lot of little ideas, right? The movie is hitting on kind of the classic metaphor for vampires of classism. And then similar to Eggers' other movies, there is quite a bit of religion and medicine talk, which I think if you're interested in it, I think that will be interesting. Nosferatu is clearly trying to say something. It's not a movie devoid of thought, but all these little ideas that it has don't really seem to fold onto the main one all that well. Because when you get to the end of this film, there is supposed to be this very emotional moment taken from the original story, but I just didn't really care. This is the movie about the broad strokes of love, the broad strokes of how society treats women, and the broad strokes of domesticity. This movie does just speak in broad strokes, and so whenever you get to the end, I thought, oh, well, maybe some prevailing idea will unveil itself, but that didn't really happen. And so similar to the original 1922 film, I thought that it was a little bit thin. Still a relatively entertaining enough time though, even though it didn't really stimulate me on a emotional or intellectual level the way that some of Eggers' previous movies did. So I'm gonna give Nosferatu a 6.1 out of 10. Still a good movie. It's a movie that I'd like to see, Hollywood do more of, but it's not particularly a movie that I will find myself revisiting. But that's the thing, Eggers is making movies for himself and people who like his movies. He's not interested in making more consumable work, and in a way, I find that admirable. We need more filmmakers who are just like, hey, I'm gonna make what I want to make. I might not have enjoyed this outing as much as some of his other ones, but I'm still down for whatever he does next. So if you're calling me a hater, don't do that, okay? A Complete Unknown is the newest addition to my favorite genre of music biopics. That was a joke. But this one follows Bob Dylan as he is Bob Dylan and things happen in his life. He's also an asshole. The movie really wants you to know that he's an asshole. So I would like to say that before entering this film, I was not too educated in Bob Dylan. I didn't go into this movie with any other wants than the fact that I wanted to see a good movie. And I guess that I did that. Yeah. I think. This is once again another solid movie from James Mangold. He is the director of Ford v Ferrari, Girl Interrupted, Copland, Logan. This man just makes good movies that look good and sound good. And A Complete Unknown is certainly a movie that looks and sounds good. From the opening images of this film, there's a lot of texture, the production design is great, and throughout the composition is solid. The world of A Complete Unknown, as far as the locations and the costumes and the production design, is like as far as that goes, it's incredibly well drawn. And whenever this movie just has its characters sit in well-realized venues, I think it's really, really powerful. In fact, I've always respected Bob Dylan, but I've never actually listened to his entire discography. But I think after seeing this movie, that might have to change. And as far as the movie's goal, that's kind of one of the big ones. It's very hard to find sincere music, and it's very hard to find a film that is able to sincerely depict music, and I think that this movie does both. And that's why I mostly resonated with the first half. The first half is more of this vibes piece where characters enter rooms and they play songs and compliment each other over this shared love of music and life and activism. Then the second half comes, and it should probably be named the Great Folk Music Debate, because it becomes all about the conflict between acoustic and electric music and new versus old music. I don't technically hate this idea. I think if the movie was really able to instill like the tenets of this debate, I think that could have been pretty good. Similar to the music scenes, how those moments were just really able to breathe. If the debate aspect of this film was depicted by just having characters sit down and talk about their thoughts, I think that would have worked quite well, and in a way that I would have left saying, wow, what a cool movie. But instead, the disagreement is quite broad. The philosophies kind of just come down to little talking points that, while occasionally interesting, don't really go anywhere. The second half also hits on the idea of fan culture and its impact on the art itself, and I think that this could have been a really cool angle, but I hesitate to say it did anything cool with it. And that's what I would say about the whole movie. It just doesn't go all that far. And this feeling of, kind of a lack of thesis would usually drive me crazy, but because of the performances and the look, I was still pretty locked in, even though I was a little bit frustrated with things. Timothée Chalamet is clearly one of the last movie stars and is maybe bringing the concept back. And here it might take a second to kind of cast aside the Timothée Chalamet-ness out of his performance, but pretty quickly you do just buy it, or at least I did. And Edward Norton is also excellent here playing Pete Seeger, this guy who I honestly think everyone should just be like. He's very kind and he wants everyone to be happy. I mean, he's a good dude. And the supporting cast of Scoot McNairy playing Woody Guthrie and Monica Barbaro and Elle Fanning playing potential romantic interests, and then you have Johnny Cash played by Boyd Holbrook. Like, even if the script wasn't my favorite, there is a incredibly large amount of charisma on screen. The interesting part is that whenever I think of A Complete Unknown, I don't really think of it as a Bob Dylan biopic. It's not a movie that when I left, I felt like I understood Bob Dylan a whole lot, but in many ways, I do think that that's purposeful. The only moments where I felt like I truly understood what Bob Dylan was about was whenever he was on stage and singing. The problem is that whenever the movie goes beyond that, and it does go beyond that, I felt like it just became a little bit messier than it should have been. And I felt this weird tension of the movie wanting to do something kind of cool and new and fresh, but also still wanting to be commercial and speak to all audiences. And I just think that dissonance was really off-putting. This movie does just kind of split the middle in terms of what audiences it wants to speak to. And as far as one of the tenets of Bob Dylan goes, I feel like that kind of goes against it. This is a good movie. It's very well acted and shot and sounds great, but past the first 45 minutes, the transgressive and important aspects of Bob Dylan's music weren't necessarily matched by A Complete Unknown. A Complete Unknown gets a 6.6 out of 10. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on this year's Christmas films, but if not, well, you can put that in the comment section because this video is now over.